I am a Gunditjmara woman from Western Victoria, and I'm also Victoria's first Treaty Advancement Commissioner. My role is to establish an Aboriginal representative body, a voice for Aboriginal Victorians in advancing treaty with government. Today I want to talk about our journey to treaty, why a treaty is so important, why it's so important to our communities, but why it's so important also to the rest of the Victorian population, and a little bit about my role. And I apologise to the Premier and other parliamentarians in the audience. You've heard some of this speech, but I have tweaked it a little bit. We all know that Aboriginal people have occupied Australia for over 80,000 years, but we as Aboriginal people believe we've been here forever. Victoria was occupied prior to colonisation. That's a fact, it's not a myth. Our ancestors walked this country when there was a land bridge between Tasmania and the mainland, and that was 30,000 years ago. Our ancestors witnessed volcanoes erupting in Victoria, Tower Hill, down in Warrnambool, down in my country, the Gunditjmara nations, and that was 32,000 years ago. And our people, my ancestors, hunted megafauna with stone tools and mere spears. Megafauna died out 45,000 years ago. And yet, our communities, our culture and our people, we have survived. Our communities had and still have a very complex social structures and our own laws that governs our ways of life. Our people knew how to use the environment for our survival. We knew medicines. We knew the art of fire farming, fish farming methods. We knew how to look after the land because it meant our survival for the land to look after us. Then something catastrophic happened to Aboriginal communities. Colonisation happened. For Aboriginal communities in Victoria, colonisation, it was brutal and had unquantifiable, devastating impacts on us as a people today. Sorry. The introduction of diseases, the massacres, and they're not myths, they're facts. The theft, the forced relocation of our peoples, and generations of our children being taken away. The impacts that manifest today on our communities is great. We have survived what could only be described as crimes against humanity. But despite all this, we remain a strong and proud people. Our communities continue to grow and make great strides. I want to tell you a little personal story about one of the oldest Gunditjmara elders living today, and that's my mother, Frances Winter Gallagher, who is an elder from the Gunditjmara nations. And this year, in August, she actually defies all odds and turns 92. Now, my mum, Frances, didn't witness volcanoes erupting. She didn't walk across that land bridge. She didn't hunt megafauna. But she did witness and feel the impacts of colonisation. Like thousands of other elders who survived and lived, to see how the impacts of trauma has manifested today in our communities. Frances lived at a little mission called Framlingham, which is down in Western Victoria. And Mum often talks to me about when she gets a little bit sad and has a couple of drinks, she often talks to me about how hard it was for her as an Aboriginal woman living down in Western Victoria. How hard it was for her and how hard it was for her people and her communities across Victoria. She also spoke about the brutality living on a mission and growing up as an Aboriginal woman. She spoke about the racism that she experienced and also her community experienced, and how it impacted on her as an individual, but also how it has impacted on the community as a whole. Mum also spoke about how hard it was for her to get a job back then. And the only source of employment that she could get was seasonal picking. Picking beans, picking potatoes, onions. And this happened in Gunai-Kurnai country, not on our own country, where we were forced to leave to seek employment. This made it very difficult for Aboriginal families to put down roots, to find an ongoing job. We had to move around to follow the seasons. And this is not traditional myth about blackfellas not staying put and flying south for the winter. This is about finding work after contact. And as a result of that moving around, my mother's 10 children, and she'd kill me for letting you know that she had 10 kids, by the way, so we'll keep that a little secret. But Mum's 10 children, myself, I'm 62 years old, and I grew up around Gippsland, moved to Melbourne when I was about 13, 14, which my date was wrong, by the way. When I had my 13th birthday, I discovered I was 14 instead, when I actually got a birth certificate. So that meant I went to, and I counted them up one day, I went to 19 different primary schools. Just primary schools alone. 19 different primary schools. There were limited educational opportunities for Aboriginal communities. Mum went to a mission school at Framlingham in the era when they wrote on slate, which I don't remember, of course. And I said to my mother, Mum, what did you learn at the school at Fram? She said, nothing. I said, what do you mean you learnt nothing? She said, well, the teachers used to put on classical music and the kids just had to sit there. That's the education level that a lot of our people had access to. But despite all this, my mother remains a very strong human being, a very strong Aboriginal woman. And she has no malice for anyone. Just recently, I took her to a funeral, last Friday actually, in Hamilton. Her baby sister's funeral, who was 70 odd, that I've never met. Mum hasn't seen her baby sister since she was a little girl. And this is not unique just to my family. Families were broken up and split up. So today, my mother still lives on her own in her little government unit up in Epping. And she values what she has achieved. And she is a proud Aboriginal woman, and she is my hero. But there is unfinished business. For us as Aboriginal people in this country, let alone the state of Victoria, there is unfinished business. Australia is one of the only Commonwealth countries that does not have a treaty with Indigenous peoples. We as Aboriginal people in this country have never ceded our sovereignty. Aboriginal Victorians have long called for treaty. Aboriginal people nationally for many, many decades have called for treaties. So this call is not new, and our demands have never wavered. Within months of Melbourne being founded back in 1835, John Batman negotiated a treaty with the local Kulin clan elders. The treaty was negotiated on the banks of the Merry River. Well, that's what we believe anyway, in Northcote. Batman exchanged blankets, tomahawks, flour, and an annual tribute or rent for about 600,000 acres of land. Now, property prices have gone up, haven't they? This shows that within 23 years of first settlement, it was already acknowledged that Victoria was occupied by a sovereign peoples. The treaty was voided by the Governor of New South Wales 2 months later. This began the start to a long series of broken promises and disappointment from governments. In 1971, the Larrakia people attempted to present a treaty to Queen Elizabeth II seeking land rights. In 1979, the National Aboriginal Conference called for a Makarrata. In 1988, 30 years ago this week, by the way, Bob Hawke, as the Premier had already commented on earlier on, Bob Hawke adopted the Barunga Statement, committing to conclude a treaty by 1990. Each of these calls were ignored, and each of these promises broken. So the call for treaty isn't new. But what is new is that this government has heeded this call in Victoria. In early 2016, the government held a self-determination forum, asking community what it means to us. What is self-determination to us? The overwhelming call is that we need treaties with government. But surprisingly, this time, government took notice and said, let's explore that option. But the first stage in the process is working out a representative structure for Aboriginal Victorians, our voice for government. We need a structure for this to commence. This is somewhat unique to Victoria. the particular swiftness, as mentioned earlier on, and cruelty of colonisation is that this state broke up. In this state, and well, across the country actually, not just in this state, but in this state broke up clans and families and sought to dismantle our connections to our culture and our country. And so today we are still trying to pick up those pieces and piece them back together. And for the last few years, the state government have been working with Aboriginal community to help us do that. And that's not just with the treaty talks, that's with the what's it called? The Traditional Owner Settlement Act, the Aboriginal Heritage Act. They're all pieces of legislation that assist us to do that. What this means for treaty is that, unlike some other states, there's no clearly defined structure of nations that covers the whole state. And it wasn't culturally appropriate before colonisation. We didn't have statewide structures. We had local, traditional owner, clan-based structures. So to have a statewide structure is quite foreign for us. So how do we put that together in a culturally appropriate way is my job. My role is to establish this Aboriginal representative body. My role is not to negotiate treaty or treaties. The representative body will be a democratic voice for our people in the treaty process and independent of government. Once established, the representative body will work with government to establish a treaty negotiating framework which sets out the groundwork for treaties, including what is on the table and what is off the table. What can a state-based treaty achieve? Who negotiates those treaties? So all those questions needs to be answered, and this is what the rep body will answer. They will answer those questions in this framework. Also, to establish a treaty authority, and this authority will be the umpire. This authority will bring traditional owners together with government when the framework's included, and they will be the independent umpire of what should happen. Also, establish a self-determination fund, which will support Aboriginal communities to be on an even playing field and build our own capability and capacity when negotiating with government. In support of this, the Victorian government, as Emma has already highlighted and the Premier, in support of this, the Victorian government has introduced a bill into Parliament. The bill would, for the first time in law, commit a government to a treaty process with Aboriginal Victorians and to ensure it's done fairly. The bill passed the lower house last week, and we expect it to be considered in the upper house in the coming weeks. I mean, I'm not privy to that sort of information. Maybe the Premier can share, I don't know. But anyway, so soon it'll be presented to the upper house. This legislation is a fundamental milestone because we are further along the road to treaty in Victoria than we have ever been before. And Emma stated earlier, this is history in the making. If this bill gets through Parliament, the first piece of legislation in this country, but some people might ask, well, what can a treaty offer? Treaties, and this is just my personal view, as I said, I'm not negotiating treaties. Treaties are the ultimate expression, I believe, and the Aboriginal community believe, expression of self-determination for us as a sovereign peoples. A treaty can give community control over our affairs and put us on an equal playing field with the state. Treaties are necessary for the recognition of the wrongs done to our people, to right those wrongs, to do the right thing, and also the promotion of fundamental human rights for Aboriginal Victorians. Treaties are an opportunity to recast the relationship between Aboriginal Victorians and non-Aboriginal Victorians. As we have seen in British Columbia and also in New Zealand, we need to also be realistic. Treaty or treaties isn't a panacea of all our problems. It's not going to solve everything. We still need the service systems out there. We still need you guys out there delivering services where it's needed. We still need the government support in the areas of mental health, close the gap, health, and we still need the VCOSSes of the world to be those champions for us. I believe it will strengthen our communities and strengthen our families. And following today's theme, I do believe it would deliver a better life for all Victorians, not just for Aboriginal Victorians. I believe it's an incredibly exciting time for us as Aboriginal Victorians and members of the community. I believe it's an exciting time for all Victorians. And as earlier said, this is history in the making. Everyone has a responsibility, I believe, to be involved and to be well informed. And express your views. You can go on you can learn more about the work that we're doing and follow us on. We have a Facebook page. We also have Twitter, and we also have an email address that people can go on and have a look at. And we are currently doing treaty roadshows, and we're talking to as many Aboriginal people as possible, but also to as many non-Aboriginal people as possible. I think that's equally important, because we need your support in this space also, especially before when it's been debated in the upper house. It'd be really good. No. The government, in closing, the government has just released a deadly questions promotional, what do you call it? Campaign. Thank you. I was looking for that word. Campaign. So go on and have a look. And I think it's an excellent campaign, and I congratulate the government. Have a look, have your say, ask some questions, and give the government some feedback on that. So in closing, again, I'd like to thank Emma for hosting and for actually inviting me along. Thank you very much.